بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وكفى والسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم لقد كان لكم في رسول الله أسوة حسنة سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. You know, there's certain relationships in this world that are formed prior to our existence. So for example, I'm the second born in my family. So before I was even born, I already had a brother. So no matter what I did at birth, I couldn't escape that relationship. Or another example, by virtue of the fact that I was born, I'm automatically a son. Even if my parents left me at birth and I never saw them again, I would still be a son. And then there's certain relationships that are forged, that an individual makes an effort to bring together. So friendships are an example. Meet someone, get to know them, play basketball with them, whatever the case may be. It's a friendship that forms. Or, you know, a colleague at work, you get a job, and then when you're at work, you begin to work together, and now you're a colleague, so you're forged in that sort of relationship. And one of the main examples of something that an individual forges, brings together, is the example of marriage. It's the relationship of marriage. Now there is a hadith of the Prophet that mentions that in the day of Alam al-Arwah, or just in the realm, the realm of Alam al-Arwah, the Alam al-Arwah is the place, the souls, that they exist together prior to being put into the womb of the mother. And this hadith actually has a very interesting background. See, on occasion there was a woman who came to Medina, and when she came, she was a stranger. And she naturally gravitated to a group of women. They began to laugh and talk, and they were very much enjoying each other's company. So the Prophet ﷺ, he showed the Sahaba that interaction, and he said that before our existence here, that the arwah, the souls, they're together in the heavens. And whomever you interacted with there, you have a propensity, an inclination to interact with here. And you may have experienced this before. There's some people that you're like, I know I met you somewhere. And there's one person in particular, and his name is Ali Rana, from Michigan. And when we first saw one another, like, I know you from somewhere. But we've never met. We came to a conclusion without a doubt that we've never met. And we never interacted. But the moment we met one another, it's as if we were friends for years upon years. We saw one another, we immediately, like, from somewhere. And so the ulama, they talk about this, and they talk about that there is a certain relationship that exists with the souls within the heavens. It's a long discussion, one that we're not going to go into right now. But anyway, we're talking about marriage. Now, marriage in Islam is a sunnah. It's not a fard. And we shouldn't take, and normally I give the morals and lessons at the end, but I'm going to preface the talk with the moral and the lesson first. Marriage is a sunnah, it's not fard. And many of our great ulama and great scholars, they did not get married. Many of the Sahaba did not get married either. One example of a person who never got married, Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, one of the great scholars of our deen, a Hanbali scholar, he never got married. Imam Nawawi rahimahullah, he never got married. There were certain great personalities within our deen that never got married. And that was their decision. It's not required. Imam Nawawi rahimahullah, when asked about marriage, he said clearly that I do not want to take upon a sunnah to violate a fard. Meaning that he didn't want to take upon a recommended act and violate that which is mandatory. What's mandatory? To maintain the rights with you and your spouse, for example. So marriage, it's, and you know, if most, I think youth begin thinking about marriage, especially in America early on. And may Allah Ta'ala grant you the most beautiful and righteous spouses possible. The idea basically is that with marriage, everyone has a role. And unfortunately, we're so bent I'm trying to fulfill the Western concept of marriage. Now, when I'm speaking of Western, I myself am born and raised in America. I may not look like it, but I'm born and raised in America. I've only gone overseas a couple times, once to visit my grandparents, and once I was blessed to go to Mecca and Medina. But aside from that, I haven't gone overseas. And one thing I've noticed about our relationships here in America is that much of what we do, we emulate popular society. Now, by nature, we copy. That's what we do. A child will see his mom or dad, or will see her mom and dad act a certain way. What do? They copy them. And it's a beautiful thing, because it teaches us early on to go to those people of authority and to begin to act according to people of authority, because people of authority usually are virtuous and have good characteristics. So a child will emulate people. We emulate, we dress certain ways, we copy certain factions of society. You know, certain people get a certain haircut, we copy it. Certain people have a certain style, we copy it. That's just the way we are. By nature, we emulate. It's part of the entire idea of being accepted as well. So, certain things in this society should be emulated. Anyone who says America has all haram things that shouldn't be followed is obviously deceiving themselves. A lot of good in this society. But one thing we don't take from this society is the concept of love. I'm 31 years old. So I'm older than some of you, I'm younger than some of you. And all 31 years have been spent in Illinois. Part of my life here in DeKalb, this area, Cortland, DeKalb. Part of my life in the western suburbs. The majority of my life in Chicago. And growing up here, I've noticed that when a person has made up their mind about something, that they'll never change. Except illa masha'Allah. So most of our youth, and I'm directing this at the youth right now, and most of you are younger than me, so this is towards most of you, think that I know best. I still think the same way. Most of the youth think, I know best, what happened to so-and-so will not happen to me, the general principle doesn't apply to me, I'm the exception to the rule. Get one thing straight right now. No one's the exception to the rule. It's called a rule for a reason. This is the general way we exist. Guy thinks to himself, oh, it's okay. For me, this is not applicable. I'm beyond this. The same person finds themselves 6 feet deep into it. So a person begins to think to himself that, okay, you know what? For me, I am, for example, I don't know, I can go to school and not take advice of what professor to take. What do? They go and they say, okay, I'll take this professor and this professor. I don't need anyone's advice. And they go and they have a very hard time in college. And they thought, I know best. 6 years later, they kick themselves, why didn't I listen to someone else? You know, I remember this with my parents in particular. So many times I thought my parents were so wrong. Dad's from overseas, mom from overseas. Obviously, they don't know what I'm going through. I'm an American Muslim. So obviously, I know best. And I look at myself and my kids today, I'm like, they were exactly right, my parents. I wish, hindsight obviously is always 20/20. I wish foresight was 20/20. And I wish I can go back and rectify some of those mistakes, if not all of them, but that's just the nature of this world. You can't do that. So one thing to realize is that we don't know best when it comes to love and marriage. We don't know best. But we come from a deen that does know best. It's an interesting book that I don't have with me. I was ordering it from California. I was reading it because one of my coworkers has it. It's called Rawdatul Muhabbin by Ibn Jawzi rahimahullah, Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah. And this is the garden of the lovers, or the path of the lovers. And it's filled with love story after love story after love story taken from the deen. Taken from the Sahaba, taken from the Tabi'een, the Taba Tabi'een. I have one particular favorite in there. But various love stories there. I'll give you an example. One that you actually find in this text in volume 2, in the end of it. But I'll mention it right now. I think you find it in this text. You'll find it in Muslim Imam Ahmad rahimahullah for sure. That there's, I think I mentioned this before too, that one time there was this, the Muslims when they conquered Mecca, and they began to conquer land by land by land around Meccatul Mukarramah. And they came to a community, and the Prophet ﷺ told Khalid bin Walid radiallahu anhu to grant them the opportunity to become Muslim, give them da'wah. If they become Muslim, then what do? Let them go. So he asked, will you become Muslim? So they said, we submit. But unfortunately, instead of saying aslamna, they said sabatna. Now sabatna, that phrase, was the phrase that many of the kuffar of Makkah, they used to use this to make fun of the Muslims. They used to use this to make fun of the Muslims. It's some sort of degraded way to say that, oh, I became Muslim. Now the reason why this community said this was because they did not know better. They were an illiterate community. So they said it with sincerity, but Khalid bin Walid radiallahu anhu took it as a verbal attack. So he ordered the Muslims to attack them. And when they attacked them, they had the upper hand, and they captured the men of the community. And then when they captured them, Khalid bin Walid radiallahu anhu said to kill your captives. So Abdullah bin Umar radiallahu anhu and his students said, we're not going to kill our captives. We know what they meant. They meant that they're Muslim. And this is the famous hadith of Muslim where he finds out, he raises his hands to Allah and says, Allahumma inni bari'u mimma fa'ala Khalid. Oh, kama qala alayhi salatu wasalam. Oh Allah, I'm free from what Khalid did, because he didn't want association with this. Radiallahu anhu wa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So, now one by one, some Sahaba didn't agree, but others followed the order. There was this one man who was traveling who wasn't even from that city. Poor guy. He just happened to be there. And he was there to get married to a woman whom he loved. Now, unfortunately, in our society, we think love is, our Muslim society, our Muslim culture, that love is something that you don't experience before marriage. Islamically, we accept love before marriage. Islamically, we accept love after marriage. Love is something that's not always controllable. The ulama mentioned 10 levels of love. Even especially the earliest ones, sometimes not even controllable. You see someone, you might fall in love. It might happen. So he was in love with this woman. He came for ask her hand in marriage. He was captured by a Sahaba. Poor guy wasn't even part of that community. So the Sahaba, he says, look, do what you have to do. But just let me speak to her for a moment. I said, okay, go ahead. So he steps forward, and she's with the gathering women, and she steps forward. And in the Arabic, it's beautiful. And he addressed her, he says, Asnimi ya Hubaysh, qabla an tafad al-aish. And he says, oh Hubaysh, her name was Hubaysh. Aslimi ya Hubaysh. Oh Hubaysh, become Muslim. قبل أن تفاد العيش, before your life comes to an end. And he says, دفاك أبي وأمي. May my mother and father be sacrificed for you. I will do anything you want. If you want, I'll become Muslim. So he's happy. He goes back to Sahaba and says, okay, go ahead, you can kill me now. So they killed him. And they killed him right in front of her. When he fell dead, she walked up to him, to his body. And she took, the hadith mentioned, took a deep breath and sighed. And took a deep breath and sighed, and she collapsed and she passed away right there. Our deen embraces the idea of love. We don't say love doesn't exist. We say that there are limitations to love before marriage. But we don't say love doesn't exist, because it's clear in this hadith. In fact, going even further, when they returned back to the Prophet ﷺ, they narrated this. How do we know this? Because this was told to the Prophet ﷺ. So he turned to them, and he was crying. And he said, wasn't there one person amongst you who was merciful? Wasn't there one person amongst you who had a merciful heart? Meaning that the man was in love and you killed him in front of his beloved? This is not something that Muslims do. So the idea is that we accept love. But we look at love to be an emotion that's acted upon after marriage or in marriage. Before marriage, a person can fall in love. But we say the emotion of love is acted upon after marriage, or within the boundaries of marriage. Because as human beings, we have needs, and we have desires. And Allah Ta'ala did not create us with those desires just so we can fight them day and night. He created those desires so that we can use them in a proper manner, we can fulfill our desires, we can have more children, and we can sustain a healthy society. He made this for a reason. But there's also a recognition that what we see, guy sees girl, girl sees guy, madly in love, now they're embracing, now there's passion, now everyone's happy, is not true. Is not the way it works. Yes, the first 6 months will be that way. You get married. She's everything, he's everything. Oh my God. So she walks into the kitchen and she sees that there he is and his, he comes home from work and his coat is over here, his tie is over there, his shoes are over there, his socks over there. Oh, how cute, she's happy. Then he sits down, he sees she burned the dinner. Wow, even her cooking is hot or whatever. It's just everyone's just happy. 6 months, everyone's thrilled. 5 months, 10 months, whatever. Then there comes reality. Reality always sinks in. Then when reality sinks in, now she sees him praying at night. Who does he think he is, trying to show off to me? He's doing a good act. Doing a good act. Or vice versa, she's doing a good act. Because eventually, human beings were not accustomed to living in such close quarters. When you share a room with a sibling, you hate your sibling. You hate him, like, why are you in my room? Even though it's a shared room. When you have a roommate, you start NIU, you're good. 3-4 months into it, you can't stand one another. It's just the nature. You have to go home on the weekends to gain some space away from one another. Those close quarters, it's difficult to maintain that relationship. And thus, when we see how it's carried upon in television or carried out in the movies, that's not how marriage is. Which is not to make us think that marriage is bad. Marriage is wonderful. But there are realistic goals that a person has to meet. And there are times the Prophet ﷺ and his wives, they would argue, radiallahu anhum. And there was times where the thought of divorce came. And the words, not that he declared it, this debate amongst the ulama, but that discussion arose. That did happen. There are times you would think, how can you be upset with the Prophet ﷺ? But the Prophet ﷺ went to Aisha radiallahu anha and said, "Oh Aisha, I know when you're upset with me." She said, "How?" He says, when you're upset with me, you say, "I swear by the Lord of Ibrahim." And when you're happy with me, you say, "I swear by the Lord of Muhammad." But they can tell. There's one narration where Hazrat Aisha radiallahu anha and the Prophet, they got into a disagreement. Husbands and wives, it happens. And so they call for an arbitrator. Let's have a third-party person decide this. Her father, his best friend, same person, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. So Abu Bakr, now we mentioned Abu Bakr, sometimes he had a short fuse. So he radiallahu anhu sat down, and they're supposed to begin to explain the sides. He totally starts going off on Aisha radiallahu anha, and is really angry. So Prophet, he steps in the way and says, whoa, back off, that you can't, we called you in to help us out. We called you to help us out, not to, get upset. And then so the Abu Bakr, he agreed and he left. So then he turns to Aisha radiallahu anha. Aisha, she's scared of her father. Because remember, there's a narration where when she lost her necklace, the whole time when wudu became tayammum, the verse was revealed, the Prophet was lying down in her lap, taking a nap. And Abu Bakr came in, and because they were saying, look, your daughter lost her necklace, now we all have to wait behind to find it, and we have to wait behind to find it, and now we don't have water to do wudu. And then the Prophet's laying down upon her lap, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, with his head, and he's asleep. Abu Bakr comes in, he doesn't want to wake the Prophet, but he still upset his daughter. So he's sitting next to her, he's poking her into the ribs, and she's trying not to move because his head, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is on her lap, but it still hurts. It happens. So now Abu Bakr, he gets upset. Aisha's shrinking away. The Prophet steps in. It's not what we asked you to come for. Then Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu leaves. The Prophet says, didn't you see how I defended you in front of your father? And she's got angry again. It happens. It happens. It's part of life. Allah Ta'ala gave purposes for everything. He gave a purpose for everything. And marriage has its purpose. Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala mentioned in the Quran, "Hunna libasun lakum wa antum libasun lahun." That you women, they are garments for you, O men. And you men, you're garments for women. What's a garment to do? Why do we wear garments? I teach at a private school, so everyone wears uniforms. And they hate wearing uniforms. They can't stand it. Any opportunity to show the individuality, they'll do it. They'll wear a hoodie, they'll wear funky socks, they'll wear weird shoes. They always want to show themselves different. We wear clothes for a few different purposes. And those purposes are highlighted in the Quran. Because Al-Quran, the ayat al-Quran, يُفَسِّرُ بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى الْبَعْضِ That some of the Quran is tafsir upon the others. So Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran about marriage, هُنَّ لِبَاسٌ لَكُمْ That women, they're garments for men. وَأَنْتُمْ, O men, you are garments for your wives as well. So Allah Ta'ala says, يَا بَنِي Adam, O children of Adam, قَدْ أَنزَلْنَا عَلَيْكُمْ لِبَاسًا We've revealed for you what? Clothing. Now this is talking about the actual physical clothing. يُوَارِي سَوْآتِكُمْ وَرِيشًا It's supposed to hide your nakedness, and it's supposed to beautify you. That's the two purposes of clothing. One, to hide your nakedness. What's nakedness? There's deficiencies upon our body, there's defects upon our body, there's shame that we need to cover, so we wear clothing to cover ourselves. For example, I was in a very severe accident years ago, 8 years ago, my stomach and chest, it's like a roadmap. There's all these scars everywhere because the surgeries I had to have. I was telling on the brother, I permanently have like a 12-pack because the way it's all carved in. That's how it's, it looks weird, but it's cool. Right? I have all these scars. But you can never tell because it's covered. It's covered. You'll never be able to tell. It's covered. One, hides your naked, hides the deficiencies, warisha, and it beautifies you. So you wear clothing, the same clothing you wear to a basketball game is not the same clothing you'll wear to a wedding. And the same clothing you wear to a wedding is not the same clothing you wear to your own wedding. If you're having a situation, you beautify yourself a certain way. The way you go to class, not the same way you go to a job interview, etc., etc. So it's there to hide the nakedness, deficiencies, faults, shames, etc., and to beautify us. Now, if Allah Ta'ala is making a similitude of clothing in the Quran as spouses, and He also defined the purpose of clothing, that means they carry the same purpose. One role the spouse plays is what? That we hide each other's nakedness. Mean the deficiencies. You know what's one of the miracles of Prophet ﷺ? The testimonies of his wives. Radiallahu anhun. Anyone could pretend to be righteous in public. Grab a sheet, tie it around your head, looks like a big turban. Don't shave for a few days, looks like a big beard. Pull your pants above your ankles, oh my God, who is this next great Shaykh that's coming? That's all it is. These physical symbols, that's what happens. Anyone could look like that. But then, now the brother comes, he gives a very nice talk in the masjid, and etc. Then the wife is in attendance. I don't bring my wife for a reason. She's in attendance. The sisters say, oh my God, he gave such a good talk. Oh, you don't know the half of it. And then, you're dead. You're dead. Because that what you're hiding from the world, your wife sees every day. The anger that you pretend not to have, someone comes, they drop a piano on your leg. It's okay, brother, alhamdulillah. You go home, your child spills water on your sock. What are you thinking? Don't you know these are designer socks? And you get so upset. It's a complete different person. We make ourselves seem to be someone in public. Often we're the opposite at home. But the wives always know. Or for the women, the husbands always know. Wife goes in public, and they're like, come shopping with us. No, this dunya is not for me. But on her own time, ching, 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 purchase after purchase. The husband knows. He sees those bags coming home, and he sees the bill in the mail, and he's thinking, how am I going to support us anymore? But that's the whole idea. The spouses, they know one another. Now, one thing you can do is you can just say, oh, you know what? You don't know the half, and explain. Or the other thing is what? هُنَّ لِبَاسٌ لَكُمْ وَأَنْتُمْ لِبَاسٌ لَهُنَّ. I hide the defects of my spouse will hide my defects. Because that's the purpose of clothing. Our shame, our nakedness, our defects, hidden by clothing. And the other thing is what? Warisha. To beautify one another. Now, we've totally misunderstood this idea. We think marriage to beautify means, okay, this guy is 6'4", 220 pounds solid muscle, and she's 5'10", and she has a lean build. And he has tan skin and she has light skin. And he has brown eyes and she has hazel eyes. They'll beautify one another. They'll complement one another perfectly. And then we say, oh, look how good they look in pictures, etc. That's not beautifying one another. Beautifying one another on a simplistic level is to speak good even in this bad present. So something, maybe your husband upset you. Maybe your wife upset you, but still, despite that, when you go home to the parents, right? Not the in-laws, to your own parents, and you only say good. Only say good. Now, I'll give you an example of this. I know normally we save lessons for after the talk, but I wanted to give the lessons for this before the talk. There is a man by the name of Ahmad Ali, rahimahullah. And he used to be a student in madrasa in Pakistan, in Lahore. Now, anyone who's gone to madrasa knows that for some reason, marriage is always on the mind of madrasa students. Maybe it's just being indoors all day or being around guys all day and just want to get away from it all. Whatever the case may be, marriage is always on their mind. And so, this young man was in his 7th year, I think he was in his 7th or 8th year, his Dora Hadith year, his final years of his studies. And so, there was some government official in the area who came to the principal, the mudir of the madrasa, and said, look, I'm wealthy, and I have a beautiful daughter. But I want her to marry a righteous man. So can you point someone to me here who's righteous? So the principal saw Ahmad Ali, this is a righteous person. He said, there, he's a righteous person. So now this government official comes and says, look, I have a daughter, I want her to marry someone, and your principal recommended you. And don't worry about money. I have a lot of money. I'll supply money for all of you. That's not an issue. Do you agree? As a mother's a student, the question wasn't even complete. He's already jumping, saying yes. He's happy. So he's thrilled. The wedding date is set. Now he's a poor madrasa student. And the madaris, IE is different. But if you go to the overseas, like Maulana Aziz, one of my teachers, he would say the size of the room was like a closet. And literally we would sleep head to foot. So there's three of us. One person's head face north, the other person's foot face, for example, face south, the other person's head face north. So that you don't accidentally bump heads into one another, right? That would just be awkward waking up, right? So that's how we slept. And it was close quarters. And these students, many of them were on zakah. They didn't have any wealth. So he's thrilled on getting married, but now he's worried. And his classmates come and say, look, buy a new pair of clothes. You have no clothes, except for one that you always wear. Just buy a new pair of clothes. It's like, I have no money. I said, I have no money. I only have this one garment. He said, okay, fine. Just wash your clothes. Just wash your clothes for your wedding. He said, okay, well, that's not a bad idea. So he takes a cloth and he wraps around his waist, from the waist or his navel to his knees, lungi. He puts that on. And he takes his qamis and he begins to wash it off. Washes it so it looks good for the wedding. He hangs it to dry. He comes inside, it starts raining. It is a true story. It starts raining and raining and raining, and he's sitting there, oh my God. So he goes out, he grabs it, he's rinsing it out, he's beating against the wall, the water's not coming out. And now he's upset with his friends. If I went to the wedding, my clothes will be a little dingy, but at least they look normal. Now they look dirty and they're wet. So it's horrible. So he goes to the wedding, and he feels like a fool. The wedding takes place nonetheless. So now they go back to the madrasa because he has to live somewhere. He doesn't have an apartment. So the teacher says, well, you can't live in the same room as your classmates, so we'll give you another room. They give a room just for them. So the room is given, and they spent the first week together. And on multiple occasions throughout the week, she fasted. Why? Because he didn't have food to feed her. So they were forced to fast because there was no food within their room. So now after a week, some Indian Indo-Pak traditions state that the wife goes back to the family. It's interrogation time. So the bride sits down in her bridal outfit, whatever she sits wearing, I don't know, I've never been a bride. And then you have all the people sitting around her, and all the women, they're all, so how is it? How's marriage? How is he? They're asking. So she's very quiet, unusually quiet. It's like, what's wrong? How is it? How are things going? So her response, subhanAllah, she said, remember, she comes from a government official, that family. She said, I used to think I was wealthy. But I never knew what true wealth was till this week. Because it wasn't the physical wealth. It was the fasting, the tahajjud, the sincerity, the devotion to Allah that they both shared that first week, that she experienced for the first time truly. And that man, through her support, became Maulana Ahmad Ali Lahori, rahimahullah, one of the great scholars of our contemporary times. Now, the reason why I mention this story is because she could have gone back to her family and said, oh, and we didn't have food to eat, and we had this, and we had this, and this is a problem, but that wasn't her response. Her response was focusing on the good. Allah blessed that marriage. Yuwari so'atikum, to hide each other's deficiencies and nakedness, warishan, to beautify one another. Finally, how else do you beautify one another? The other way you beautify another is exactly how they did in this relationship. Through striving for the sake of Allah. I've met anyone here when Maulana Naeem, rahimahullah, passed away? Did anyone come to IE that day? I was there. Maulana Naeem is Maulana Abdul Salim's father in Elgin. He was in his 90s when he passed away. And he was an extremely handsome individual. Extremely handsome. And the day he passed away, I remember seeing him before they laid him to rest. There's such a beauty on his face, such light. I spent some time with him in madrasa. So much light and beauty on his face. The opposite of what we experience. Someone gets old, what do? Midlife crisis. Now they begin to dye their hair. They begin to get Botox. They begin to do this and that to try to preserve beauty. But you can't preserve beauty in that way. You'll still show your age. You'll still show some plasticity there. It'll look plastic. But when a person ages with actual beauty, with the honor that comes with age, with the respect that comes with age, and the purity of leaving sin, then there's a nur that shines. And I saw that nur on his face, that I was shocked. A man of that age looking like with such vigor. First of all, he lived as a very, he's very excited in his life to do acts of worship. But two, he always submitted to Allah. And when a person, look at the Prophet mentioned, that may Allah have mercy. Allah has mercy. Allah grants mercy, which is what often is Jannah. For the husband who wakes up for tahajjud, and he wakes the wife up for tahajjud, sprinkles some water upon her face. And may Allah have mercy upon the wife who wakes up for tahajjud, and wakes the husband up for tahajjud, sprinkles some water on his face. That's what the deen's about. Because honestly, after 1 or 2 years of looking at the same person, nothing's going to change. If I stare at my wife for 40 minutes, her face won't contort to a new person's face, or vice versa. It's going to be the same. You would have experienced everything physically from that person within the first year. And at most, now they're getting older, now their hair is changing color. I used to have shoulder-length hair when I got married. Now I'm lucky to have any hair on my head. That's what happens. That's what happens. It all went from my head to my face. I don't know what happened, but it all went there. That's what happened. You gained weight. I'm 20 pounds heavier since I got married. You lose muscle mass. These things happen, right? Whatever the case may be. So if you're always in love with the physical, then what happens? It all falls apart. When you're in love with the spiritual, something beyond that, when you work at something deeper, then you can look at her, and her hair might be silver, but the heart is gold. And you totally look past what's physical. And the Prophet, he made Khadija radiallahu anha, we're going to get into, she was 40 years old. He was 25. He was in the quote-unquote prime of his life. He could have married anyone. He was a handsome individual. But he married Khadija radiallahu anha. And yes, she was still beautiful, but the beauty wasn't the same beauty as a young woman. But she was a righteous and noble individual. And she was someone who was pure, and that purity reflected in her actions and the way she carried herself with the Prophet ﷺ. So I want to stop here and give us an opportunity for question and answer before I get into the actual marriage of the Prophet ﷺ and Khadija radiallahu anha. Are there any questions before we get started with that lesson now? Yeah.
The Prophet, you said that they would have arguments, right? But wouldn't the Prophet know the best way to treat his wife? So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But even when you know the best way to treat your wife, or your wife knows the best way to treat the husband, arguments still happen. It's the nature of being married. I don't know how any other way to put it than the nature of being married is sometimes, I'm not saying you always argue, but the nature of marriage is that there'll be misunderstandings. And this, you guys should bring a good question. So what happens in our society? And you probably heard this example before. That we determine marriage eligibility or proper couples based on what? Based on looks usually. Looks, culture, etc. So he's from Pakistan, Lahore, and she's from Pakistan, Karachi. Okay, this is good. Then he's a medical doctor, and she's a paraprofessional. She's a paralegal. She's a lawyer, assistant to a lawyer. And he's 6'2", and she's 5'10". And he is light, tan skin, and she is light, gori, right? She's light skinned. And he has a slightly muscular build, and she's thin build. And he has sort of an anger issue, and she's very patient. Oh, they will work great together. That's what we think. Now, and he's 24 and she's 21, or he's 28 and she's 25, whatever. So we think everything's perfect. He's just slightly taller, slightly better build. All these things. This is a power couple. We get so excited. Now, when this couple gets married, what happens? Initially, it's the honeymoon stage. Everyone's happy. But then what happens is that the true colors begin to show. What do I mean by that? Marriage is not the union of two people. It's the union of everything inside those two people. It's a very important thing to understand. That when people get married, they don't just marry two people. Everything associated with that person. Their mom, their dad, their siblings, their work, their environment, their clothes, everything comes with it. So now, these two people, 28 and 25, whatever, that's their age. But spiritually, they haven't developed. So they're little kids spiritually. They haven't been praying much. They haven't been working much on themselves spiritually. So they're little kids. So what happens? I have a son who's 6. I have a son who's 4. Zayd and Uthman. Uthman's almost 4. If I put them in the room together and I leave, either they'll play happily or they'll fight. There's no middle ground. They'll play or they'll fight. Just 2 nights ago, my wife was at class, and Uthman found my wife's Kindle. He said, Baba, I want to play on this. No, Zayd said, Baba, I want to play on this. Uthman said, no, I want to play on it. I said, no. So then, so what happens? Do you take the 6-year-old, 4-year-old, and put them in a room? The 6-year-old wants the Kindle. The 4-year-old has 8 other things to choose from. What does he want? The Kindle. He has 10 things to choose from. He wants the same thing. Because they're so immature. And they're going to begin fighting because both of them want, for whom? For me. They don't say, oh, my brother wants it, take it. No matter how much I tell Zayd, you're the older brother, look out for him. No, I want it. Because that's the nature of children. They want for themselves. So I told Zayd that Uthman wants the Kindle. No, I want it. I'm like, well, you asked for it first. So Uthman began crying. I said, look, Uthman, Mama's MacBook is there, her laptop. So you can play on that. She's at home. No, I want Kindle. I'm like, are you sure? He's like, no, I want Kindle. So I'm like, okay, fine. So I went, I'm like, Zayd, can Uthman? I'm like, no. I'm like, no, Zayd, listen. Mama left her laptop. You can play on it. He's like, okay. Then Uthman's like, no, I want laptop. Of course. Because they're kids. They're kids. And then the fight ensued there. Why? Because always I. And if someone else has the advantage, no, I want the advantage. Now you put a 28-year-old and 25-year-old in the same home. They're physically that age. But spiritually, they're 6 and 4 years old. They haven't been developing spiritually. So now what happens? The first 6 months, everything's fine. Then one day he comes home and, she's working late because, she's an accountant and it's tax season. He's working late because he was on call, whatever the case may be, or he had to work late as a teacher, whatever he works as. And then now he comes home and he says, why isn't the food ready? And she said, what do you mean, why isn't the food ready? Let me ask you, why isn't the food ready? And then they begin to fight. Rather than saying, you're right. The husband saying, you're right. Let's just order out tonight. Just end it right there. No. What do you mean? Your mom said you're a good cook. Why aren't you here cooking? Right? Then the wife says, I know my rights Islamically. I don't have to cook for you. You have to cook for me. Or you have to hire someone who cooks for me. And then they start bashing heads. Why? Because they're 6 and 4 year olds spiritually. Now the Prophet was not 6 or 4 year olds spiritually. He was beyond us completely. But if you take 2 adults and put them into a room, 2 adults, they still fight sometimes. Why? Because in the end, some nafs is involved. And had the Prophet ﷺ not ever allowed an argument or to occur between him and his wives, how would we ever know what to do? So he knew it was going to happen, but he knew that how to handle it. But if Allah did not allow him to let it happen, what would we think? The moment, because our Prophet never fought, so if there's a fight in our marriage, let's just divorce, let's end it. No, he left the example there. The Prophet was made to do things that he would not normally do. He would do acts that were makruh. Why? So we know that they're permissible. We shouldn't do it, but they're permissible at times. So it was permitted upon him to commit, to partake in these things. Like he even says, he even say, حُبِّبَ إِلَيَّ how's the hadith go? Then he says that certain things in this world, certain things from your world were made beloved to me. He never takes the world for himself. It's like from your world, people, certain things were made beloved for me. He wasn't going to argue. But Allah Ta'ala allowed this to occur so that we would know how to handle the situation. If not, husbands and wives would be dead. Marriages would fall apart left and right. But that example is left for us.